I was actually pretty desperate to leave, and I tried several ways first. So I initially moved interstate with a boyfriend, but then it was awful. He was retrenched from his company like a few weeks after we arrived. So we came back to Perth, did a couple of things like that. I nearly went to the Solomon Islands on a volunteer program, and then that didn't quite work out. Nearly moved to Cambodia similarly. I was trying so hard to get out. So I was just like, I'll go anywhere. I don't mind. And it was still in the era when teaching English in Japan was quite a lucrative deal. And so one day there was an ad in the paper. I applied and got accepted to go and teach English in Japan. Now, I had not taught before then, but I had worked in education on the research side. I didn't think really that I was interested in being a teacher, but I got to Japan and absolutely loved it. And it's been a part of my career ever since. I'm a lecturer at uni now, and I work in some high schools doing podcasting work as well. So that was all meant to be. And the Japan thing, this is like back when Japan was not really well known as a tourist destination. And I didn't really know what to expect there. I just moved there because I wanted to leave Perth, and I absolutely fell in love with Japan. I stayed there for 2 years and have been back four, I think, or five times since. And I would go every year if I could afford to. I absolutely fell in love with the food, the culture, the history, the people, the language, everything. So it was a lucky break.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it was transformational in many ways.
Definitely. I mean, it transformed like my career, it transformed my outlook on life. It really cemented a proper love for travel. I mean, I don't know what would have happened to me if I hadn't found that app. So I was driving along and I had to go to the hangar for the scenic flight, bird's eye view. And I was like, okay, well, this will be beautiful. And then I got there and I'm expecting like a small plane to take me on this scenic flight over the reef. But it wasn't a small plane. It was a microlight, which I didn't even know existed. And I learned very quickly that a microlight is basically like a flying motorbike. So it's like a motorbike that has like a hang glider wing on it. So you just sit on this thing. And the pilot, his name was Gav, I'll never forget him. And he said to me, the emergency exits are everywhere. Because there's nothing
Yeah,
holding you in except a little seatbelt. I mean, a good seatbelt, but still. And I was absolutely petrified because I'm a little bit of an anxious flyer, even in a jumbo jet. And then suddenly I realized that I had to go up in this microlight thing, and I was absolutely terrified. I think I kept my eyes closed the first 10 minutes of the flight. Luckily, it was like a 45-minute flight or so. Eventually, Gav persuaded me to open my eyes. And yeah, the views over the Ningaloo Reef from up there's nothing like it. It was absolutely spectacular. Very, very, very glad I did it. And felt I was very lucky to have such an experience. I know, I think we are underplaying over tourism, if anything. And it ties back to people feel that they deserve to go somewhere, and that we must go to place X because everybody does and everybody says it's amazing. So for example, Japan, when I lived there 25 years ago, you could go to Kyoto and go anywhere in Kyoto, any of the famous temples, the Kinkakuji, the beautiful golden temple, and there would be a normal number of people visiting, certainly not a crowd. Even when I went back, so that about 14 years ago, even then I took my son back, he was about 8, and even then we went to that temple, the Golden Temple, Kinkakuji, and we had to shuffle around in a queue. And this was before over-tourism really hit. So I absolutely dread to think what it would be like to go and see the Golden Temple now. I think there's no way you could not pay me enough to go, because it would be such a disappointing experience to be there with so many people. However, there are 95% of Japan, probably 99% of parts of Japan that are just as fascinating and beautiful.
just thought I'd have a quick word, just to recognise that this is the 10th series, an anniversary of a kind. It's been 2 years, 60 guests. I just wanted to say thank you for all of your perspectives on travel, and how appreciative I am of your time. It's been absolutely amazing. And now, back to this week's essay. And now, back to this week's episode. And now, back to this week's episode. And now, back to this week's highlights. Amanda, welcome to the Nifty Travel Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Alex. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, you're most welcome. And one thing I always like to ask everybody is about your earliest memories of travel.
Well, I was a very lucky child. I grew up here in Perth in Western Australia, so very far from everywhere. But my parents had this idea that perhaps in the future my sister and I would leave Perth, and they wanted to know what it would be like, where we might go. It's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, I think. But anyway, when I was 9, my dad had long service leave. He worked in the bank. He worked in the same bank for 44 years. So long service leave is a lovely Australian entitlement. So he could travel, or he could be away from work for 6 months and still be paid. And that's the whole other, we couldn't have done this otherwise. And we took off to Europe and bought a camper van in London and spent 6 months driving around most of Western Europe and the UK and Ireland. And that was, obviously a pivotal experience for me. I did end up going to live in Europe later in life. So my mum was right. But would I have if she hadn't taken me? I don't know. But also it really introduced me to, kind of budget, slow travel. We had, obviously we had my dad's income, but we certainly weren't wealthy by any means. So it was, very much supermarket meals cooked in the van, getting to know people in caravan parks, and an absolutely, pivotal moment of my life, that 6 months.
Wow, it sounds idyllic. So I guess almost in a way, would you say it was destiny that you would be connected to travel later?
I mean, I think so, except then, like, my sister had the same experiences, and while she occasionally travels, she certainly doesn't have anywhere near the passion for it that I do. So, I guess it was, for me, it was meant to be, but it didn't necessarily have that impact on everyone. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, growing up in Perth, what did it mean to you, and why do you feel like a home girl, as I...
So Perth, I grew up in like the, late 70s, 80s, 90s in Perth. And this is like before the internet happened, Perth was behind the times always. So we always thought that like even fashions or anything came over from Sydney or Melbourne a year or two later. We were very isolated. Nobody, like, it wasn't common to fly within Australia. It was much too expensive. I never flew to the East Coast. And Perth is a very, out of the way place. It's the nearest city is Adelaide, which is a, good 3.5 hour flight. It's actually closer to fly to Indonesia than to fly to another Australian city. And we just have kind of vast gulfs of nothing in between. But we live in a really, really idyllic, beautiful part of the world with, I think, the best beaches anywhere, great climate, it's a great family life. So I think, when I was a teenager in my early 20s, I couldn't wait to leave Perth. Like many of my friends, we all moved away from Perth for a while, but nearly all of us have come back. And it is, a fabulous part of the world to be in, but not somewhere you can necessarily live your whole life, I think.
Yeah. So when you look at Perth from the air, one gets the impression that it's a coastal city in the main, but of course not everybody lives on the beach. But it's growing. It seems to be growing very fast. Public transport seems to be expanding all the time.
So
it has
yeah.
Yeah,
it's not. Yeah, we're not. Our public transport is improving, but it's still pretty bad. I mean, Perth has been through a big boom in the last 20, 30 years, mostly because of a lot of more mining activities in the north of the state. But most people don't live in the north of the state permanently because it's hot and horrible. Beautiful areas, but the weather is not very conducive to work, and there's not much else up there. So there's a lot of fly-in, fly-out workers, and they are generally based here in Perth. It also means there's a fair bit of money in the city, so people like to have a house, not a smaller place to live, and they like to live near the coast. So the Perth is a very long, stretched out city with suburbs going up and down from the centre all the way up and down the coast. And a few people live in the hills area, but definitely the majority like to live closer to the coast. I mean, me too. I'm 3.5 kilometers from the coast, 10-minute drive, and I absolutely love it. If I was crazy wealthy, I would love to live right near the ocean, or at least walking, a short walking distance. But those houses are way out of my price range. Podcasters never are going to earn enough for that.
But maybe one day soon, eh? That's what I always hope.
You never
know. So, when you did feel this urge to spend some time away from home, you went teaching abroad. So how did you choose where to go, and how did you choose what you would teach?
So, very good question. I was actually pretty desperate to leave, and I tried several ways first. So, I initially moved interstate with a boyfriend, but then it was awful. He was retrenched from his company like a few weeks after we arrived. So we came back to Perth, did a couple of things like that. I nearly went to the Solomon Islands on a volunteer program, and then that didn't quite work out. Nearly moved to Cambodia similarly. I was trying so hard to get out. So I was just like, I'll go anywhere. I don't mind. And it was still in the era when teaching English in Japan was quite a lucrative deal. And so one day there was an ad in the paper. I applied and got accepted to go and teach English in Japan. Now, I had not taught before then, but I had worked in education on the research side. I didn't think really that I was interested in being a teacher, but I got to Japan and absolutely loved it, and it's been a part of my career ever since. I'm a lecturer at uni now, and I work in some high schools doing podcasting work as well. So that was all meant to be. And the Japan thing, this is like back when Japan was not really well known as a tourist destination, and I didn't really know what to expect there. I just moved there because I wanted to leave Perth, and I absolutely fell in love with Japan. I stayed there for 2 years and have been back 4, I think, or 5 times since, and I would go every year if I could afford to. I absolutely fell in love with the food, the culture, the history, the people, the language, everything. So it was a lucky break.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it was transformational in many ways.
Definitely. I mean, it transformed like my career. It transformed my outlook on life. It really cemented a proper love for travel. I mean, I don't know what would have happened to me if I hadn't found that ad. I would have probably gone somewhere at some stage, but that was just really the right place for me at the right time.
Yeah, sounds like it. So travel is all about perspectives. So when you did return to Perth, did you look at Perth, Western Australia generally differently?
Oh, absolutely. So I ended up living about 6 years abroad, both in Japan and in Europe. And obviously when you're, the token Aussie, wherever you're living, people ask you a lot about your country. And I actually had to learn a lot of things that I didn't really know about my country's history or culture, because they asked me questions and I'd have to kind of find out. It was, embarrassing, the things I didn't know. So I kind of, came to appreciate some parts of Australia more. to unappreciate, or to kind of be more skeptical about some in some ways. But definitely when I returned, I felt I wanted to return partly because my family was here and my parents weren't getting any younger, and I wanted to be closer to them, because when I lived abroad, you can't just pop back to Australia for a weekend, or I missed every wedding that my friends had in our 20s and stuff. So I wanted to live back here, and I wanted to raise a family here. And I think I could be happy in many, many places around the world, but I do feel really lucky. And especially the more the world has got kind of crazier in the past sort of decade or so, I feel very, safe and happy tucked away down here in Western Australia, where nobody goes and nobody really thinks about us. It's, we have a very happy, lucky lifestyle here.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you talk about how you're someone who notices, cultural quirks, I believe you described it, but also things lots of things that we have in common. So, any of those stand out for you?
Compared to Japan, or in Australia in general, or
yeah, compared with what you in your traveling experience, what surprised you, amused you?
Oh, right. So many things. I guess one thing that the more I travel, the more I realize is that we are all actually very much the same. So, I could go to Japan, where many parts of the culture seem very, very different, but most of our motivations and, kind of the things we want for ourselves are very, very similar, regardless of our race or religion or our upbringing. So I think that's a really nice thing to emphasize. But beyond that, I think it's the differences that make life interesting as well. And Japan is a country full of contrasts. I learned things like, I can't even imagine where to start. But for example, here in Australia, most women work. We have a fairly decent gender equality in general. We still complain about a lot of things, but compared to many places, a woman in Australia can pretty much, do what we want. We can, I own my own house. I have worked for myself for, 20 years. There's lots of things I can do. There's not that much in way of barriers. But when I lived and worked in Japan, and this might have improved a little bit over the years, I noticed and, learnt from my students that, many women didn't work after they were married. I even had students who would come to my English classes and they hadn't told their husbands they were paying for their classes out of hesokuri, which is like secret money. You take a little bit each week from the housekeeping your husband provides. And that to me was devastating, to think that, in the 21st century, that kind of thing could be happening in a seemingly modern nation like Japan. So yeah, those kind of things, I think, are things that I'm really intrigued to learn. And I think it's important that I think the more we know about how everybody lives, the similarities and the differences, the more we can kind of understand each other and humanize everybody and, get along. It seems important to me.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong there. We need to encourage travel everywhere, don't we? Because it's understanding. It cuts through the noise, doesn't it? And that's the thing that people sometimes miss.
Yeah, and I think when you see the news at night, if you see the news and it's about, Senegal, but you've never met a Senegalese person, or, you don't really have a clue even where to find it on a map, then it's very difficult to relate to that. Whereas if you have traveled there, or you have a friend, from Senegal, those kinds of things, then it makes a whole heap of difference to how you perceive what's going on in the world. So I think that, if everyone kind of got to know other people, in varying lives better, that would solve a lot of problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, because of your trip to Japan and getting into teaching, would you say that then influenced your desire to carry on teaching when you got back to Perth?
100%, absolutely. So I guess I learnt that, I'd never really thought of myself as a teacher, but I learnt that I really love helping people to learn. I've always been a big learner. I'm definitely a lifelong learner and a very curious person. And I think learning to teach in Japan was a great way to kind of really quickly upskill some of my, some of the things I would use in a classroom. Japanese people, on the whole, it's, certainly a stereotype, but is generally true, quite shy in a classroom. Culturally, they don't want to make mistakes. They don't want to lose face. And so to be able to get a class of Japanese learners talking requires quite a lot of, engagement and skill. And, I think that stood me in good stead to teach in other parts of the world and back here in Australia. And I also really enjoyed teaching English. So when I first moved back to Perth, I was teaching English still. So I'd done it for maybe 6 or 7 years in total, and then a couple more here. And when I came back to Perth and, got that work, of course, the learners came from all over the world. So I'd have people in my classroom from various parts of South America, Asia, Europe, and that was like going traveling every day, because I'd go in and talk to them and find out, new things that I didn't know about their home countries. And I'd love seeing, their friendships develop across cultures and the things they learned as well. And so I think that sparked a lot for me in terms of, of really enjoying teaching. And these days at university, for example, where I lecture, we often have a lot of international students. In our postgrad program, where I've taught a fair bit lately, we have about 90% of the students come from Bhutan. And so I have learnt so much about Bhutan, which I always thought was an interesting place. And I've still not been there, but I will go. So, there's a lot of things to love about teaching for me, but getting to know a whole variety of people in those kind of circumstances, I absolutely love it. It's kind of like traveling, even if they're not from another country. It's still the way you get to know, different people in that kind of circumstance. It's a real thrill and a real privilege too.
Yeah. No, isn't it interesting that you can travel the world just by standing in front of students?
Absolutely. I just used to think, oh my goodness, how lucky am I? I get to, have these very cool conversations and learn so much. It was just, it's just fabulous.
But one of the things you did abroad was you started writing travel articles in magazines. So what was the spark that made you think, oh, I'd quite like to do that?
I had always been a writer. And according to my grandmother, even when I was 3 years old, I told her I wanted to be a writer. I cannot verify that, but I trust my grandmother. Anyway, I'd always loved books. I always loved writing. So when I was living abroad, it kind of seemed a natural kind of consequence of that to try travel writing, because I was having a lot of travel experiences, both in the places I was living and, during our holidays or weekends and time off, we would travel a lot to other places as well. So I ended up writing for a few magazines, mostly based in the US. For a couple of years. And I still do that from time to time, but most of that segued into initially writing my blog. And I was writing for, doing paid work on other blogs. And eventually that sort of segued into my podcast, because I wasn't traveling as much anymore by the time my son came along. And I was living back in Perth, as I said, quite a far away place. And so podcasting seemed like a great way to kind of transition and still be able to talk to lots of people in lots of places around the world and produce something that was hopefully of interest to others.
Yeah, absolutely. But when you did start your blog, you decided to link your grandmother's story in the title. So tell us how that came about.
I did.
Why I should tips on this particular subject.
So the scene that my grandmother had told me about many times was when I was 3, and in her living room down in the southwest of WA, or the Great Southern. And I was dancing around, and she apparently said to me, "Oh, Amanda, you could be a ballet dancer when you grow up." or a ballerina, she said. And I looked at her, apparently quite disgusted, and said, "No, Nan, I'm going to be a writer." And so when I then decided, okay, I'm going to put this blog into the world and, do more than just writing for other people, I decided to call it Not a Ballerina, because no, Nan, I'm not a ballerina. I am a writer, as I promised you all those years ago. So, of course, that my Nan has long since passed away, but she was around still when I started that, because that's over 20 years ago. And she and I were firm pen pals. We used to write to each other constantly wherever I was in the world. So she, I always connect that and the love of writing with the love of my beautiful Nan.
Yeah, no, I think Nans are important to us. I remember my Nan also used to write to me, and I would have to write back. So that was a good habit to get into, and yeah, nice memories.
Yeah.
So when it came to the blog itself, a few subjects popped out that I wanted to ask you about. So you talk about being a thoughtful traveler. So how did your traveling and how you thought about it change?
Good question. So, I mean, initially when I traveled, I was, I didn't really think about it. I just traveled the ways I knew how. And partly I was always a budget traveler because I was never wealthy. And I had those, campervanning experiences with my family when I was a child, which, really influenced, I'd never stayed in a fancy hotel or anything, even if we occasionally traveled within Western Australia, we'd stay in a little motel, just a really, the budget, just a budget kind of place. And then when I started writing more about my own travels, I still, because I was mostly based, living in another country, my travels were often like slow. I would just go one place on the weekend and that was it. I wasn't necessarily going out and going, 10 places in 10 days, kind of tick a box travel. So it kind of just evolved like that I then realized other people traveled in different ways to me, and I didn't want to travel like that. At the same time, I also kind of started to really notice how good travel was for me. So, for example, before I left Perth, I'd had issues with anxiety and stress, and when I moved abroad, it almost vanished because I was so happy to be out there and traveling and seeing the world. So it kind of did good for me. And so many ends. As time went on, I also got involved on social media, and I don't know even how I came across it, but I used to be involved many years ago with a responsible tourism Twitter chat every week. I used to be a co-host, and we would ask questions, and we would all, I built up kind of they built up kind of a community of people who were traveling in more responsible ways. And so all of these kind of things started to meld together, and I tried to decide what is this called? I didn't want to just focus on eco-conscious or sustainable travel. And I thought that thoughtful travel kind of summarizes a whole lot of things that are basically about trying to do things the best way for you and for the world and the places that you meet. So yeah, this whole thoughtful travel kind of came about through, a lot of different influences. And at the time, it wasn't really a thing, and I just kind of created it and decided that was what thoughtful travel was going to be.
Yeah, and staying in the thinking concept here, do you think more and more people are thinking more thoughtfully about their travel than before? And if so, what is changing, do you think?
So yes and no. I think it's a complex area. But for example, I think during COVID, a lot of people started to be more thoughtful about how they might travel, partly because they couldn't at that time, and perhaps because, they saw things like, we saw footage of over touristed places without tourists suddenly being able to kind of breathe again, and, the water is clear again and things like that. And so I think there was a lot more interest in the topic. But then COVID kind of resolved to some extent and people could travel again, and because they hadn't been able to travel, they were suddenly like, oh my goodness, I have to do all of this travel that I always wanted to do, because now I know that privilege can be taken away from me. Maybe something could happen again and I can't travel. So I'm going to go out this kind of revenge travel, and I'm going to go to Antarctica now. I'm going to do this. I have to do all the things just in case, there's another pandemic or whatever. So I think a lot of that good thought was then lost fairly quickly. But on the whole, I mean, I've been running the Thoughtful Travel podcast for over 10 years now. So I have kind of input and ideas from my listeners over, a full decade. And there's definitely much more interest and a lot more. There are more people who are thinking more about how they travel and trying to do it in more thoughtful ways. But we are still definitely the minority of travelers.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, it's if you could say it's the way humans are, or not really. It's largely about who you like traveling with and who you are influenced by to a certain extent. I try and sort of put my finger on it, why some do and some don't, but I don't think there's necessarily a clear path. Only that, at least from my own perspective, and you can tell me whether you're feeling the same way. I'm sort of walking a path where I'm coming into contact with more people who are interested in it. So I feel a level of optimism around it.
I mean, absolutely agree. There's definitely, and similarly, I meet so many people, and a lot of my listeners, of course, as well, who are absolutely, really, really trying to travel in really good ways and to tell more people about it and so on. But then, of course, there's other forces like, I don't know, Instagram influencers and TikTok influencers who are like focused on showing you've got to get this particular shot, this photo in this particular place, and, really causing havoc at those kind of places. So there's sort of some extremes going on. And yeah, I don't know what the final outcome will be, but I'm just going to keep chipping away and hopefully persuading more people to kind of have a go at traveling in a more thoughtful way. And there's other issues. For example, I have a lot of American listeners, and in America, or in the US, it's very common to have a very short amount of paid time off each year. So if they have only 1 week, then of course they want to quote unquote make the most of that week, which they might think involves going to Paris and Rome and London within 8 days, which to me sounds like an absolute nightmare. And I objectively think you would have a much better time just choosing one of those, and you'll get a lot more out of that trip. But this kind of, concern that I'm never going to get this chance again, and coupled with this is my holiday, I deserve it kind of approach, then that's very hard to fight against. But I often, I bang on about this stuff all the time, but I often try and encourage people who are kind of reluctant to be more thoughtful about their travels to just try and experiment. I always say, just have a half a day on your 1 week itinerary where you have nothing planned and be spontaneous and see how that goes. It might be the best half day of your trip, and, those kind of little things that can hopefully start to move the needle a bit with more people.
Yeah. And on that subject, would you describe yourself as a planner or a spontaneous person?
Oh, definitely more spontaneous. So my dream travel is like the travel I did in my 20s where, for example, we had to leave Japan, I don't know, on, the 1st of June, and we had a job to do in Bratislava in mid-August. And then, we had a Lonely Planet and off we went, and, traveled across Russia and then backpacked down through the Baltics and parts of Eastern Europe. And, we didn't have any bookings. We just had an end date where we had to be somewhere to start a job. And that is absolutely my favorite kind of travel. It's much harder to do that these days because a lot of things that you want to do, especially since COVID, but in general because of tech and internet, I think as well, you need to book in advance. So there might be no room at the inn, or you might really want to go to a museum that you can't go to. I can't tell you the number of people I have said, if they're going to Amsterdam, oh, you have to go to the Anne Frank Museum. It's one of my favorite museums in the world. And the number of them who can't get tickets to go because it's booked out so far in advance. I have been twice and I never needed to book in advance because it was, years ago. So I absolutely prefer to not plan too much at all. Unfortunately, I need to make a lot more bookings when I travel than I used to. And depending on, where I'm going, is it, school holidays, so there's less accommodation available or whatever. But I still do try very much to plan less. As an example, so last year we went to Seoul, South Korea for 8-9 days. And I went with my teenage son. We went in November or October, November, off peak. We had a place to stay booked for the whole time, just one spot. That's all I booked. And, and then it's not to say we don't do research or investigate things. We had a lot of, we had a list, we had lots of ideas, but we woke up each day and thought, okay, this is what we're going to do today. And off we went. And, I think you often get a better trip that way because you can, be spontaneous depending on things like the weather or how tired you are, how well you slept, just what you feel like that day. I think having to follow a schedule is like the worst thing for me. I just would hate, that's my least favorite way to travel.
Perhaps some of the best memories come from unplanned events.
100%. Yeah. And also when things go wrong, like the number of stories of people having things go wrong on their travels, and then they tell me that story on the podcast. These are always the most popular episodes. And the people who tell me the stories will also say, actually, yeah, that was like that's one of my most memorable moments ever traveling. And, yes, even things go wrong and it's good, but you don't plan for things to go wrong. So that's also part of that, the spontaneous joy of what can happen when you're traveling. It's unpredictable. You bump into someone, you get a recommendation from someone you're chatting to in a queue at a cafe. There's so many things that can influence what you might do. And if you've got these strict plans, then, it's very hard to be flexible and do, what the other things that you feel like or find out about.
I think it's why I love reading biographies, because some of the best biographies seem to include a travel moment that changed their lives, and probably led to the reason that they became known enough to write a book about it. But so it's interesting what travel can do. Now, of course, part of the travel conundrum is this thing that's becoming more mainstream. We call it overtourism. And we tend to focus only on a few destinations. Do you think we're overplaying the overtourism, or is it simply that the places we talk about, well, surely they could manage it better and it wouldn't be such a big deal?
Oh no, I think we are underplaying overtourism, if anything. And it ties back to the, people feel that they deserve to go somewhere and that, we must go to place X because everybody does and everybody says it's amazing. So, for example, Japan, when I lived there 25 years ago, you could go to Kyoto and go anywhere in Kyoto, any of the famous temples, the Kinkakuji, the beautiful golden temple, and there would be a normal number of people visiting, certainly not a crowd. Even when I went back, so that about 14 years ago, even then I took my son back, he was about 8, and even then we went to that temple, the golden temple, Kinkakuji, and we had to shuffle around in a queue. And this was before overtourism really hit. So I absolutely dread to think what it would be like to go and see the golden temple now. I think there's no way you could not pay me enough to go, because it would be such a disappointing experience to be there with so many people. However, there are 95% of Japan, probably 99% of parts of Japan that are just as fascinating and beautiful, but there are no tourists there because they're absolutely focused on these key sites, and they go to Tokyo, go to Kyoto, they maybe go to the snow, and then they go home. A couple of years ago, I went hiking for, I spent 2 weeks in northern Japan, like a few hours north of Tokyo, not all the way north in Hokkaido, but a few hours north in the Tohoku region around Sendai. And we hiked a trail following a poet's trail, following a haiku poet's trail. And it took us through these tiny villages that are basically dying because all of the local people, as you know, as young people grow up, they move to the city, and you know, they're desperate for tourists there. You can have the most magical experiences. They have, you know, so much culture, history, the temples, the food, the amazing landscapes, mountains. You know, I had the best time I've ever had in Japan there, and that's saying a lot because I really love Japan. So, you know, while we have massive over tourism in a few spots, there's also significant under tourism in parts of the same country. So I just think that a lot of people could benefit from resetting their, you know, their mindset of, I'm going to go to these places, but just go somewhere else and you will have an amazing experience, and possibly, or I would say probably, a significantly better experience than by just going to the over touristed places.
Yeah.
I could rant on about that for about 6 hours, sorry.
Well, I did read up a little about Japan when I interviewed somebody who lives there permanently, and I seem to remember reading that, you know, there are 21 regions of Japan spread over goodness knows how many islands. So I just wonder how many how many people go visit outside the most common areas. And I think you've kind of
Not
summarized.
many.
But what about Australia itself? Isn't it interesting? Because I think you talked about things that we all have in common, and I think one of the things Brits and Aussies have in common is that we love to go and visit each other's countries amongst other destinations, but we're not terribly good at visiting our own countries. You know, I live on a slightly smaller island than Australia, but I still haven't been everywhere. Do you think we share the thing in common is that we're addicted to going abroad, but we're not so hot when it comes to visiting our own place?
100%. I mean, absolutely. I've seen a lot of Australia, but I'm still guilty of, oh, I've got a couple of weeks, I'm going to go to Asia, not I'm going to go to, you know, far north Queensland. I mean, partly I think that's because we know that, you know, we kind of know a lot about what our own country is like. So I'm not going to get the same level of difference of culture and history and stuff. But still, I think, I mean, certainly during the COVID era, when the Australian borders were closed, there was this huge, and it was, you know, really lovely rise of domestic tourism because we couldn't go anywhere else. And, you know, Australians visiting parts of Australia that they had always thought they would one day, but then doing it, you know, with their families instead, or, you know, I mean, there's so many beautiful parts of Australia. The other problem in Australia is it's really expensive. So within Western Australia, you know, if I fly, you have to fly unless you're going to drive for, you know, 2 to 3 days. I could fly somewhere, you know, in the north of Western Australia for the same price that I could fly to Tokyo. So, you know, it sort of is a difficult choice usually, or it'd probably be cheaper to fly to Tokyo most of the time. But I've been really lucky. I also do some work running marketing workshops for tourism businesses in Western Australia. So through that, I get flown to a bunch of these parts of my state, and I feel so lucky that I get to see them because I probably wouldn't otherwise. And you know, it's too expensive to go and to stay, and oh goodness, we have such amazing beautiful parts here. So yeah, it is definitely, I think that's probably, you're right, something we have in common. Australians are not great at staying in Australia, but there's a lot of factors for it. The other thing, for example, here in Perth, it's very, very close to fly to Bali. I'm not a big fan of Bali because most of Bali, well, many parts of Bali have been overtaken by Australian-owned businesses or other foreign-owned businesses. So there's a few issues there. But a lot of people from Perth will go to Bali once or twice a year for a week or 10 days. And most of the reason is that it's much cheaper than having a holiday within our state. So even though we have a beautiful wine region, 3 or 4 hours south, if you go down there and the accommodation costs, etc., and now fuel costs and stuff as well, it's like much cheaper just to fly to Bali. And it's also, warm all year round, which is nice in our winter. But it's hard to be persuasive about staying within your own country when these other options exist, especially when they're cheaper. Sad but true.
Yeah. One thing I'm interested to hear about, of course, is when people talk about tourism to Australia, they tend to think of, it's a bit like you were saying about Japan. People think of the same places. I must see the bridge. I must see an opera house. I must go see some sport in Melbourne. But they forget that there's a much larger and deeper experience. You just talked about going to outlying areas within Western Australia. Is there kind of I don't know whether tension is the right word, but do you think there are tourism opportunities that sit outside the most well-known destination?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, the average visitor to Australia will go to Sydney and go to see the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House. They might go to Queensland to go snorkeling on the Great Barrier Reef. And if they've really got lots of time, they might go into the centre and see Uluru. And those are absolutely worth doing, magical places, totally. I have, no issue. And they're also not over touristed, and they've got a lot of good infrastructure for tourists, so there's definitely no harm. I think there's no harm in going to any of them. The Barrier Reef has its own issues, but not necessarily only from tourism. Climate change is the bigger issue, but a lot of people want to do all of those things in a week or so. And when you look on a map, these are huge distances, and it's not like we have a population that supports significant numbers of flights per day and stuff. So a lot of people plan these trips, which basically involve half of their week or so sitting in Australian airports. Australian airports, there's nothing wrong with them, but they're not very exciting places. It's no Changi. It's not worth writing home about. So I have always thought that if you're going to come to Australia, you should just pick one region and get to know that better. And yes, you'll miss out on some other things, or maybe pick two if you're really desperate to see, a variety or a contrast, or you really think it's the only time you'll ever come this far. But I think wherever you go, we have landscapes where, across Australia, we have most incredible natural landscapes because we are a very huge but very empty, relatively speaking, country. We have so much unspoilt land and landscapes, and whatever takes your fancy, you can find it. We have right from the tropics down to Tasmania, where it's much more reminiscent of the UK or Europe, and whatever you want to do, there is something to do. And of course, a lot of people are interested, with good reason, because they're very cool in our animals and our wildlife, and there's so many beautiful opportunities to do that in an ethical way as well, not just go to Australia Zoo and see them in a questionable way. There's the problem is, I think it takes a lot more research and a lot more kind of commitment to the cause of traveling well, and not everybody's prepared to do that, which I fully understand. But I honestly think wherever you go, I mean, obviously, I think Western Australia is the most beautiful part of Australia. I'm very biased, but I really think it's incredible. A few years ago, my good friend and I spent a week walking on the Cape to Cape track, which is southwest of here, and takes about a week to walk. It's like 140 kilometers or so. It's very varied. Obviously it's along the ocean, but you also, can walk through the forest and even the ocean, the varies in many ways along the way. And we often have said since, if this particular bit of coast was anywhere else in the world, basically, especially if it was, anywhere in Europe or North America, it would be absolutely overrun with people. It would be over touristed because it is spectacularly gorgeous. But it's stuck down here in little old Western Australia, so you can walk all day on that track and see maybe 5 people. And, where this is the problem, both the problem and the joy of Australia typified, I think.
Yeah. And one thing I see that you did, which is on one of your profile pictures, is that you got a chance to fly over land. Was that an Aussie flight by any chance?
Yes, you must be referring to my Microlight flight, I think. Now, there's a funny story there. So it's must be nearly 10 years ago now. And I actually, thanks to one of your comrades, I was at the very last minute invited to join a media trip, which was actually for British media. But literally at Heathrow, one of them got sick, couldn't get on the flight, and they needed someone who was already in Perth, ready to hop on this itinerary. And so I was very fortunate. I got flown up to Exmouth. It's around Exmouth, and the Ningaloo Reef is up that way. Ningaloo Reef absolutely rivals the Great Barrier Reef, just nobody really knows about it. Anyway, it was very last minute. Like, I had to kind of leave the next day, and it was organised by Tourism WA, the DMO here. And I'll always remember the guy got on the phone to me and said, "We've sent you all this, blah, blah, blah. Have you looked at the itinerary?" I said, yes, looks great. Amazing. I've never been in that area. And I was going to be on my own. Each of the media was split up to a different part of the state for most of the week. And then he said to me, "Oh, you don't have any phobias, do you?" And I thought, oh, that's an odd question. Nobody, in all my tourism trips, nobody's asked me, "Do you have any phobias?" And I thought, oh, maybe he's talking about the scenic flight, because there was a scenic flight mentioned. I was like, I don't really love little planes, but I'm sure it'll be fine. So I was like, okay. And so then I, busily got off, and I was up there, snorkeling on the Ningaloo Reef, and, very busy few days. And then the last day it was a self-drive. So I was driving along, and I had to go to the hangar for the scenic flight, bird's eye view. And I was like, okay, well, this will be beautiful. And then I got there, and I'm expecting like a small plane to take me on this scenic flight over the reef. But it wasn't a small plane. It was a microlight, which I didn't even know existed. And I learned very quickly that a microlight is basically like a flying motorbike. So it's like a motorbike that has like a hang glider wing on it. So you just sit on this thing. And the pilot, his name was Gav, I'll never forget him. And he said to me, the emergency exits are everywhere, because there's nothing holding you in except a little seatbelt. I mean, a good seatbelt, but still. And I was absolutely petrified, because I'm a little bit of an anxious flyer, even in a jumbo jet. And then suddenly I realized that I had to go up in this microlight thing, and I was absolutely terrified. I think I kept my eyes closed the first 10 minutes of the flight. Luckily, it was like a 45-minute flight or so. Eventually, Gav persuaded me to open my eyes. And yeah, the views over the Ningaloo Reef from up there's nothing like it. It was absolutely spectacular. Very, very, very glad I did it. And felt I was very lucky to have such an experience. It was crazy.
So when you got up there, then you kind of you forgot that there were many emergency exits, and we're looking and enjoying the view more.
Absolutely. Eventually. It took me a while though, but Gav was a great pilot. Although he was like, he was very chatty. We had headsets on, and he had music to play. So he was asking me, what music. So he was like fiddling with the dials to get the right songs on and stuff. And then he's showing me pictures of his newborn daughter and telling me he hadn't had much sleep. And I'm like, I don't want to know that you're a tired pilot, and I don't want to look at your photos until we're back on the ground. Thanks. But no, he did also at the same time manage to put me at ease. And and then the views were just like literally breathtaking. I can't believe I got to do it. It's such a beautiful part of the world. We're so lucky.
Yeah. And as you say, a part of Australia that's not well known.
Mm.
So that's interesting.
No. Yeah, and I'm sort of glad it's not too well known, because that's why it's still so beautiful, probably.
Yeah. Now, you once wrote an article, or perhaps talked about it on a podcast about social media itself. And you professed to say what you really think about it.
Ooh, what did I really think? I'm not sure.
That seems well. I hope it got a lot. Had a lot of eyeballs on it. So, what are you prepared to say now?
I mean, I think my opinions change over time. But what did you see that I said? I'm very curious.
Well, I didn't want to. How do you say? Spoil the moment by actually finding out what you said at the time.
Honestly, I don't know what I would have thought, because my opinions about social media go up and down all the time. I have very mixed feelings about it. It's a very love-hate relationship, and I've kind of built half my career on it as well. So I don't know what I said, but I'll tell you now what I currently think is that I wish people didn't compare themselves to each other on social media and therefore think that they have to go and get the same photos. I wish people just spoke about the things that they love and gave other people, viewers, listeners, readers, the freedom to love whatever they love as well, whatever their own hearts desire, and not trying to make everyone follow the flock, I suppose. And at the same time, social media has been amazing for me to get to know people, made firm friends all around the world. Especially my podcast listeners. I've been to visit many of them. They've been to visit me. There's been so many positives that wouldn't have happened without social media. So I guess that's what I think at the moment, but I don't know. Ask me again in a week.
Yeah, you're right. There's different phases of life. And of course, podcasting is a fun thing to do. So we have this thing in common. What are the best things about it that you've discovered?
Podcasting is just such a joy to me. So I was, for a long time before that, I was a very keen podcast listener, and I think one of the reasons, still am, but one of the reasons I love listening to podcasts is that I can take them with me, whether I'm driving or exercising or doing housework. I can be listening to my favorite people talking, or interviewing new and interesting people. I also love the community around podcasting, and I love the fact that over the years I've got to know so many of my listeners, and like having those connections with like-minded people has been absolutely fabulous. And I think, I don't know, I just find it endlessly fascinating. The way I run my podcast is I created a whole lot of extra work for myself, because every episode I'll have tales from 3 different people, and I edit them together, and I've made it much harder than it needs to be, but I love the kind of the creativity of I've talked to all these people, and then I'm going to pick out 3 stories that kind of match together and make a theme. And I find that it's just heaps and heaps of fun to do. So lots and lots of different reasons that I love it. Obviously I love it, or I wouldn't have kept going for a decade already, and I certainly don't intend to stop. So I'm very, very happy that podcasting exists.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like when you create, that's the writer in you coming out. Every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and the linking of the stories together, and kind of coming up with some conclusions or some takeaways sometimes. And I think it is definitely a very creative process for me, and I think that's why I've been able to keep going for so long, because I really love the process, and just because I get to meet like so many cool people, like it's such a privilege.
You're right. Meeting people is part of the joy of it.
And there's something special about chatting to someone, like, for an hour or so, that you don't get in like in social media, from a social media post, but when you when you get the chance to sit down with someone, somewhere in the world, and talk like this, I find that, it's very connecting, and I've made so many amazing friends that way over the years.
Yeah, no, it is a good way to make connections. Now, in terms of wrapping up our conversation today, I kind of like to get your feeling on how you feel the travel industry is going. What sort of direction do you feel the industry is going in?
It's a good question. I think on the whole, trending towards the positive. I think there's still a lot of lip service towards doing the right thing. There's still a lot of greenwashing on travel companies' websites. And yes, we're very environmentally friendly, but if you dig, slightly deeper, there's really not much to show for it. But there's more consumer demand for us, for them to do better. I don't know. We talked all about over-tourism, and that I think has not had a good resolution yet, apart from, some destinations actually putting in place their own measures to limit tourists. It would be nice if they didn't have to, because tourists could just behave better. But it's not just tourists, it's the whole industry. I don't know. If I was giving it a report card, I'd say we're just a slim pass at the moment, and there's a lot of room for improvement and hard work to come.
Yeah. So out of that list, is there one thing you personally like to see?
Oh, so many. But yeah, I would like to see individuals kind of taking back their power, I suppose, in a way, and ignoring a lot of the marketing and just following their own interests and following their noses and doing what they want to do. You see all that, in the over tourism stuff, you'll see the thousands of people lined up at the Louvre to see the Mona Lisa. And, I have also done that, many years ago. I went to the Louvre while I was in Paris and I saw the Mona Lisa. I wouldn't do it now, not just because of over tourism, but because I've also kind of thought, hang on, am I interested? Actually, no. And a lot of people do that because they think that's what you do. That's an item you tick off the list. If you're going to Paris, you should see the Mona Lisa, because otherwise people will say to you, oh, did you? And you'll have to say no. But I had a guest a while back who said something I've thought about so much. And they said, if you're not a keen art gallery visitor back home, why would you suddenly become a keen art gallery visitor when you're abroad? What do you do back home? If you love going to the pub when you're at home, maybe that's what you should do when you go to another country. And I think that's so valid, because you can learn a lot by visiting a pub in another country. You can see what kind of drinks they sell and foods, and, what's their local beer like, and you can get chatting. You'll probably have a great chance of getting chatting to some local people and learning more, and you'll have so much more of a fun time. And yeah, it's not on a top 10 list anywhere, but that's not the point. I think if we can, persuade more people to just accept, just to think about what's their interests, what's their passions, what would they really enjoy the most, and do that when they travel, rather than just ticking things off a top 10 list. I think that would solve a lot of issues, I personally think, and that would be my number one thing.
Yeah, maybe we should rename the top 10 to the top 10 things we shouldn't do.
That's an excellent idea. I'm prepared to put an asterisk, top 10 things you shouldn't do, asterisk, down the bottom, unless you are really genuinely passionate about it. I'd be okay then.
Well, Amanda, an hour goes by very speedily when we're having fun.
Doesn't it?
I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us today.
Thank you, Alex. It's been such a pleasure to chat. It's I could talk for all day. So thank you so much for your thoughtful questions.
No, you're most welcome.